All right, so we are live and we are recording. Welcome everyone to all of those who are joining us on Facebook.
Okay.
I'm Angela Moonan
got
here on
insurance
behalf of
policy.
Stanley Law. Joe just got a phone call. So we're starting here momentarily.
Yeah,
We
we're
have
doing
with
okay.
us, oh, Joe, can you mute real quick? Just as, oh, you're all set. Okay, wonderful. So we are talking today about family emergency planning, financial emergency planning, setting aside and creating habits and intentions around preparing for the unexpected. No one is immune to the unexpected. That's called life on planet Earth. So we're talking about what can you do to take the reins of your own money for you, for your family. And then in the case of, certainly there's going to be different perspectives here, and I'm going to let Joe frame that. We're going to also come at it from the long-term planning aspect. If you are awarded money, if you do come into a large sum of money, that's a different mindset altogether, and what you need to do then, as well as considering both short-term and long-term finances. So we are, as always, taking your questions via Facebook. This is being recorded, so you will be able to share it, reference it later on, encourage others to take a look at this, because these are tools and things we're going to talk about today are applicable to everyone in your family, and everyone contributes to that mindset within the household. So with that, let me welcome our guests, and then I'm going to hand it over to Joe Stanley. We have with us today Senior Vice President of Retail Banking at Seneca Savings, Laurie Ucher. Welcome, Laurie.
Hello, everyone. Good to be
We
here.
also have workers' compensation attorney, Megan Fallon. She's part of the team at Stanley Law. You've seen her before. Megan, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
We also have from Financial Quest, our LPL financial planner, Greg Boshart. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, everybody.
All right, Joe, would you like to frame our topic for us today? I know you were on Bridge Street this morning, so thank you for rushing back over and getting on here with us today. Talk a little bit to our audience about what they can expect to hear about today and the perspectives at hand.
Well, emergency planning is something that we all face across the spectrum. And so planning for a regular person, I'm sure almost half or more of the people that we're talking to, and almost all of our clients, don't plan pre-accident in terms of what they should have for a medical emergency, a loss of job, an injury, an accident, all of which present huge financial stumbling blocks. Okay. And that doesn't necessarily apply to just lower income people. I think this applies if you have a budget and you're spending all your money, it doesn't matter what, if you don't have any cushion. So, you know, if you're spending $100,000 a month, we've seen celebrities that can spend incredible sums of money, and then something happens to them and they're broke. They have to file bankruptcy. So no one is immune, and everybody has the same illness. We all think it's not going to happen to us, so we don't need to plan for it. But we do, and we see it, and Megan's going to start off with it, is that when these bad events happen, you're hurt on the job, you're hurt in a car crash or on a construction site, or you have a medical emergency, you lose your job, you have other events, your house burns down. I mean, there's a whole series of bad things that could happen and do happen to anybody at any time. And if you don't have a cushion and a long-term plan before bad events come into place, then you are at huge risk. And we have multiple stories about our clients who are living on the edge financially, who have something happen to them, and now they are in deep financial strains, which not only strain their finances, but strain everything else, including our lawyers sometimes, because they expect us to work miracles that can't be worked. You can't retroactively, make a plan. Once bad things happen, that's it. on the other end, if you end up having a situation where you get compensated for an injury after you've been through all of these hard times, that absolutely should require planning, because most of the time you have a permanent disability or you have a limitation or you have future medical expenses. That requires the same kind of planning as before, except that you'll have a fund of money, and you also have at least some perspective of what the limitations are of how things might go. You know, you versus, you know, before something bad happens, you never think it's going to, but once it does, at least you have some perspective. So those are the two things. It's the coming and going. They both require a plan, and planning is essential, and everyone hates to do it because it's time consuming and it doesn't seem to be cost effective when we're doing it. It only seems cost effective once something happens. And so Megan, I passed that wonderful story off to you.
Okay.
And then we will let our experts who are much more knowledgeable in the planning department, because I can say Megan and myself, we both use experts to do our own planning such that it is, and we should all do a better job. I myself included.
Yeah, I'll be interested. Yeah. I'll
I'm
be
not
interested in
immune to
whatever
the
they get.
disease. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
immune to the disease that it's not going to happen to me.
Right.
We all have it to some degree or another.
Yeah. And so I think a couple of things I've thought of from my point of view, having done this work, meaning representing injured workers in workers' compensation and Social Security since like 1993, say. When I first started, you had to know how benefits interacted, such as pensions, long-term disability policies that were purchased, you know, not required by law, but a benefit the employer offered. And then at the time, New York State workers' compensation, which we do, covered medical for life, and any lost wage payments available were for life. There was no cap on how long they could be paid. So we always had to figure out how those interacted. Unfortunately, due to all the economy and all these other factors, right, very few people have pensions anymore. And New York State workers' compensation law changed for all injuries after March of 2007. So now what workers' comp covers is medical for the rest of your life on the injury suffered only, right, and lost wages. But now those lost wage payments are capped. They're not for life. The only exception to that is if a person's classified by the court as permanently totally disabled. If I showed you 25 people that are not permanently totally disabled according to the court, you'd be shocked, right? So it's almost impossible to get that finding. So we have a lot of people that they're injured relatively late in their work life, especially if it's a physical work. Medical's covered for life, but only on the injury, right? So if they're working and they have health insurance and that was covered by their employer, I have to tell them, well, no, I thought workers' comp is for life. It is on the medical for the injury, but all your other health insurance is not, right? So now they got to come up with a way to pay for their health insurance. When workers' comp was written, there was no such thing as health insurance, private health insurance. So there's no benefit that covers it, right? It's one of the biggest things people lose in terms of value. So anyway, medical's covered for life, lost wages. So what happens with people that are injured at work is they are paid, they figure out the person's average weekly wage at the time of the injury. When they're pulled out totally disabled, which is only 100% defined as 100% unable to do anything, not just their job, but any work, they get 2/3 of that number, 2/3 of their average weekly wage. But the minute a doctor says, well, you can't lift over 5 pounds, that might render them unable to do their job forever. But that is defined now as partial in comp. And now they get a fraction of total. So if a guy was making $1,000 a week and now he's getting $660 at total, it's non-taxable money, but still they're only getting $660. If a doctor says they're 50% disabled, now they get $300 a week. They can't do their old job and they got to start looking for work, and somehow they're supposed to live on that. So that immediately means if you don't have some kind of cushion or somebody else in the house that's taking care of finances, it's a huge problem. And then what happens is eventually after they say now 130 weeks, so 2.5 years worth of benefits have been, 2.5 years passes from the accident. The judge determines their permanent level of disability. So let's say, again, the person's classified 50% disabled. Now they are entitled to, if they're out of work, the 50% rate. In the example I gave you, that's $300 a week for a maximum of 300 weeks more, which is 5.5 years, a little over 5.5 years. So that client is sitting there with me constantly explaining why that's all that's covered and how they are possibly supposed to live on that. If they go back to work and they're earning less money, if they made $1,000 a week at the time of the injury and now they're making 500, comp will make up 2/3 the difference, the other 500. But again, there's a cap on it. So after 5 years or 7 years, they can't get that anymore. So, and then because of that, a lot more people are interested in settling because they figure, well, if it's going to run out in 5 to 7 years anyway, I'd rather have something to show for it. So, and the carriers take advantage of that, right? Because they'll offer us some real fraction of the present value of that obligation. And then the client looks at this money and says, I can't possibly replace that income with this money. And yet we're dealing with best case scenario in a not so great scenario. So I think I provided Greg with a couple of scenarios and just trying to help the client make the decision. If I have some money in front of me, it's not going to cover everything, but do I want to keep the payment or do I want to get some money up front? And if I do get money up front and I've never had money up front, right? I've never had a chunk of money. What's the best way to handle that, right? Because I think that's true for all of us, right? So that's kind of where I see it. I also, just one last thing is, I think a lot of people think I just have to make it to retirement, quote unquote, to when I'm old enough to get Social Security. You're old enough to get Social Security. You're old enough to starve, in my opinion, right? Social Security, if that's your only number, it's your quality of life is very often nowhere near going to be covered by that. So I think when we rely on the law or the government thinking that they have come up with some idea and plan that's going to actually make us be able to live, we have to kind of recognize and realize that that is only going to be a teeny little part of what you need. So I won't go on further. I did have some slides on some examples, Greg, I gave you, but I don't want to waste everybody's time and let the experts get at it, and we can chime in with those later maybe.
Yeah, well, Megan, if you've got slides, if you want to share, Greg can speak to those slides as well.
While she's working on that, that's the comp perspective. And of course, from a personal injury perspective, hopefully the damages that you are recovering are more comprehensive. Part of the reason is why every time a comp client comes into our office, we look at whether someone else other than the employer is responsible, is because workers' compensation is so limited in time and place, but a personal injury case is not limited in time or place. The only limitation is how much insurance coverage there is. So that may be the cap that's the same as workers' comp or less, depending on how much insurance coverage there is. But assuming that you have a case where you get all of your damages recoverable, I can say with absolute certainty, 85% of my clients, despite being told otherwise, take the money and waste it away. It's gone. It's dissipated on cars, trucks, fun, and what was meant to pay for permanent disability and lifelong impairments and restrictions ends up being gone in a year. And it's sad. And then, there's no other well to come back to. And you're probably in a worse place when you do that. So PI and workers' comp related, they may have their own caps from different reasons, but they still have the same issues. Someone who is in that position needs to understand where they are and what the future holds with the limited funds that they are being given and their limited capabilities to earn additional income, either by working or Social Security, or if you have some kind of limited pension. And that requires a lot of thought. And sometimes it's some things that people don't want to think about. And I will let Megan and Greg go.
Yeah, I mean, do you want that example now, or did you want some others to do some general financial stuff? It's up to you.
Yeah,
guys.
well, we've got both perspectives, right? We've got the cases to which the scenarios to which you were speaking about, Megan. And then we also have what Joe opened up with was, how do you establish habits now? All right. So right here today, and I know Greg's shaking his head because I've heard Greg say before, when's the best time to start planning and investing your money?
Now.
Well,
Yeah, it's now.
30, 40 years
Yes,
ago, right?
yesterday.
Your
Yeah.
first job.
Yeah, yesterday. Yeah. Or
But the
300
second but the second best time to start is right now.
Well,
So, and as Joe said, you can't rewrite history. You can't go back and retro plan. You can only begin right where you are. So let's do a little combination of things here. Laurie's got from Seneca Savings, she's got some terrific slides that walk us through some of those life examples and scenarios. And then let's kick it over as we go and as it makes sense. Megan, you can recall a certain case, or Joe, you can recall a certain case or something that may speak to one of these aspects, and Greg will pull you in to talk about those long-term planning attributes that relate to that. So let me share the screen and let me pull up the slides here. All right. So Laurie, I'm going to let you kick this off and talk a little bit about your relationship with money and how you step up in that relationship and shift your money mindset so that you are in a better position to control your future with your money.
Yes, so at Seneca Savings, we offer tools and resources to help our customers and our clients to understand financial foundations. We do have resources online, but also we do a lot in the schools. We have a partnership with our Central New York schools, and I think that's really where it starts, is in the schools. Financial literacy isn't something that's in the core curriculum currently in New York State. So we stepped forward with providing some tools and resources from our partner called EverFi, and we're proud of that partnership. We've provided hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of financial learning in the schools. But when it comes to prioritizing your money, it is a mindset. It is all about a mindset and understanding what our priorities are in life, and understanding too what truly is a financial emergency. And as Joe mentioned earlier, these are some cases, some instances of a financial emergency, a serious accident or a job loss or a divorce. But more commonly, I would say, more often than not, people are faced with the financial emergencies of having to replace the furnace that goes in the house, or maybe it's, you've got to replace your tires on the car. And so having a cushion or a personal budget that's set aside as a safety net for these types of mishaps is very important. Sometimes people think, well, my plan, I'm just going to dip right into the credit card, and or maybe I'll take out a loan to cover that expense. But if you're creating actually another problem by taking out a high interest loan to offset the current emergency. So by creating the habit of saving for these unexpected financial emergencies is a better option.
I'm surprised, Laurie, at some of these. I mean, 6 to 12 months to find a new job. I just had my AC, one of my AC units go, and my handyman said to me, "Oh, well, you can probably plan for somewhere around $5,000 to replace the unit." So I got 3 different estimates, and the least estimate was $9,000. That's how prices have skyrocketed so significantly. So I think the webinar is that we're timely in your resources and the tips and the webinars and the extra work that you're doing in schools, because I think we're in times where of inflation, that it's even harder to just check out at the grocery line or fill up your gas tank at the pump. So these larger things, a car repair, a trip to the emergency room, et cetera, or a home repair, an appliance, are even that much more significant. And then how many people don't have, to what Joe's point was earlier, hardly any of the folks that he deals with have really planned properly. And then when the accident happens, forget about it. Their world is in a tailspin. So 1 out of 3 doesn't have enough to cover some of these basic emergencies that come up. So let's talk about, Laurie, it is hard to get started. It is hard to change a habit. How do you begin?
Well, it starts somewhere, right? And again, creating a financial habit of placing and setting up a savings account and calling it your emergency savings account. I bury my savings account. I don't see it when I log into my mobile app. I push it aside because I want to know it's there, but I don't really want to know it's there. I want to automatically set aside a portion of my pay, or we have a program here at the bank where at Seneca Savings where you can round up your change every time you use that debit card. It'll round up to the nearest dollar or the nearest, $5, however much you determine that will be, and it adds up quickly. It could, as the slide says, setting aside $50 a paycheck could add up as much as, it could cover that emergency expense by just setting aside $50 a paycheck, or however much you can, basically.
And between 3 to 6 months of expenses is what most experts recommend. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it depends on your needs, too, and the person.
One of the hardest things that I think people bump up against is they know that they need to do this, but they don't want to face the reality of where they're at. And because they feel like if they know, then it's going to be a bigger problem. The truth is the problem already exists. And that by, the biggest part of that battle is facing the reality of where you are. So when you really stop and take an assessment, what are my debts? What's my income? What do I have in savings, if any? And then you can create an action plan to improve that reality. And it's such a freeing thing to face up to where you currently are. And then, the steps that Laurie's provided here is exactly the way you go about getting to where those goals are. But what I see very often is people are afraid to face that reality.
And just get real with their money.
That's
Yeah.
correct, yeah.
There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of unknowns, and they don't feel empowered around their money. And so it's a very emotional thing. And Laurie and Greg, you're around money every day. That's your livelihood, right? But for us, yes, we're, consumers, we're using it, but we don't have that other side of the perspective that you all do. So when you look at this, like as an example, Laurie, have you ever used a budgeting app, or there are certain, tools that you in your own family that you use? I know you mentioned to me the other day, you use this luxury tax idea of if you are going to splurge and go beyond what budget you've created for yourself, you tax yourself, and then that amount goes over into your account, right?
Yeah. Yep. Really, a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck, but they're still want to treat themselves every now and then. Maybe it's even just like that cup of coffee that costs, $3 or $4 now. But if you think about, I'm going to tax myself for that and put the money aside in the savings account every time you purchase a cup of coffee, it's little things like that can add up to a lot over time.
The reason 401k investing is so successful is that it's automatic. And Laurie had talked about setting aside $50 a paycheck. If you can set up so that you have money come out automatically, and once you get used to not having that money, most people can find $50. I say most people can find $50 in their paycheck that they can cut back on, and your standard of living will adjust to that, and you won't even miss that money. And before you know it, like Laurie said, you'll have $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 built up in an emergency fund, and that's really where you need to get started. You've got to have that emergency fund.
It's true.
Laurie, how do you talk about the 50-30-20 rule?
It's a pretty basic concept. If you're thinking about, all of the income that you have And you take that and you say 50% of that, my take home pay should be allocated towards the needs, right? The utility payments, the car payment, the house payment. And then I start with the savings. I think that's next, really 20%. If you could put 20% of your savings aside and first establish your financial emergency fund, and then from there, start your long-term savings. Maybe Greg, you might disagree with that, but I think you need to have money set aside so that you don't find yourself dipping into your retirement account if there's a financial emergency. That's probably the worst thing you want to do. And then there's the wants, right? And that 30% wants bucket is something that you can easily scale back when necessary, right? If the wants, going out to eat, shopping for your favorite clothing, that type of category you can scale back, or, splurge when you have additional income. Yeah, so again, labeling in your mind, thinking, okay, I've got these buckets of money. This is my emergency fund. This is we see this all the time. A lot of people have 5 different accounts set up because it helps you compartmentalize your money in your mind. There's the household account, there's the day-to-day account. I think labeling your money, it helps you to understand what you're saving for. And then, of course, having some cash isn't a bad option either. Having some cash available so you don't find yourself maybe taking out the card in the emergency is a good option.
So when I just want to wrap up with have you wrap up with these last slides, Laurie, that what we talk about, and I hear the bank talk about often with financial prosperity and financial literacy tools, is that what you're doing is you're giving yourself the control where you can control. So there are lots of things that we can't control: the economy, we can't control what other people are going to do, but we can control what happens in our own household with our finances to a large degree. And the more that we manage that aspect of what we can, when the unexpected happens, that's outside of our control, we're in a better position to handle it, to absorb it. So there are some things in general, though, Laurie, that you recommend that people be mindful of, not just around the emergency fund, but other aspects that you can control to keep you in the driver's seat. Can you talk a little bit about some of these?
Yeah, I think it's important to put your documents, all of your important documents, your birth certificate, your, all of your items in a place where you can easily locate them, as well as your family if anything happens to you. I recently, my parents passed away, and I'm still trying to find things. So it would have been helpful to know where items were kept, but I'm sorry, my earbud's falling out. So replenishing your funds too in an emergency. If you're in a financial emergency and you're trying to, come up with additional funds, there are some ways that you can allocate money, set that aside to get a tax refund. A lot of people receive nice tax refunds every year, but instead of putting it aside, choose to spend it. Controlling your expenses, the 30% bucket, that's another area where you can replenish your emergency fund. And being flexible, always go back and reevaluate your budget.
One thing that was interesting, Laurie, that I heard you recently share on a podcast, and that was if you've ever gotten a raise or a bonus or something like that, rather than, not that you would completely abstain from treating yourself or celebrating a little bit with that, but by and large, you didn't just amp up your lifestyle to meet that new threshold of your income. What you did was say, look, I've been living comfortably. As Greg said, I'm acclimated at this level. I'm going to take anything extra that I'm getting, and that I'm going to put aside. Have you done that yourself in your own life?
Yes, I have. I do. I think because the sense of urgency now to put money away for my retirement is it's coming up. So if I can live off from a budget right now, I may as well just put the other money aside. And plus there's a tax benefit, all that good stuff that I know Greg could probably speak to better than I can.
So Laurie, if someone wants to reach out to you, they can email you at lusher@senecasavings.com. They can walk into any one of your 4 branches. And we thank you for your input here. I am curious to hear, Greg, when you talk about that 20% savings on the 50-30-20 rule, do you see that as 10% going over into your emergency fund or immediate cash fund or travel fund, whatever, and then 10% into the long-term saving? Is that a good rule of thumb? Or I know it varies family to family.
I mean, 20% is a great goal. And then, you need to divide that between your long-term retirement savings and your immediate needs. What I was trying to get to earlier is that you definitely want to build up that emergency fund before you start thinking about the long-term planning. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is they get overly aggressive with their 401k investments or the retirement plan investments. And then they find that they have an emergency and they have to go in and tap that money. Well, that can cost you more than borrowing money from the bank, because there's a tax penalty plus a 10% penalty for early withdrawal. So, that's where this planning really comes into play. And, Megan and Joe really gave me a lot of fodder. I mean, I think we're on a limited time here, but I mean, this could go on all day if I wouldn't put people to sleep.
No, we've got a good 15. We've got a good 15 minutes, Greg. We've got a good 15 minutes.
There's a lot of things to get to, but I'm sure everything that Laurie just discussed is the way we all should be living our lives, seriously. And I'm sure that if Megan and Joe saw people come in that had been doing this, there'd be a lot less heartache, a lot less tough decisions that need to be made. But I think what I'm hearing from both of them is that the reality is a lot of people haven't done these things. And so then you're faced with, okay, what are these choices that I, have to make? And there's no perfect answer if you haven't done the planning ahead of time. And that's really, what Joe was saying was, the time to plan was yesterday, Joe said, and that's really the truth of it. If you've got 3 to 6 months or a year's worth of savings, then whatever time it takes to work your case through the court isn't going to end up, putting you, I don't want to be, hyperbolic about this, but put you into poverty, put you in a situation where you're finding it hard to live day to day and you're relying on family and friends to get you through until you get that settlement. Okay. And then the other thing that Joe mentioned is very, very true. And it's more than just in this scenario, is the spending down of sudden wealth. Okay. Somebody gets a settlement, or a parent dies or a grandparent dies and someone receives an inheritance. It's very, very common to see that money go very, very quickly. I've been holding off. I haven't been able to treat myself. I deserve this. I mean, are all common things that people use when they're spending down this money, when in reality, money from a settlement or an inheritance is money that you could be using for your retirement planning to establish the accounts that Laurie was talking about, to make sure you've got those emergency funds. Then you can, okay, what's left over, and then what do I need? So there's always a bunch of questions that I get into with people when they're in these situations. And the one is, do you need current income? I mean, if you receive money and you need current income from that, well, that's a whole, different set of, where do I put it? Do I put some of it into a savings account? And then do I invest some of it longer term? Do I use an income producing product that will give me a guaranteed income, similar to a pension that I can rely on long term? If you don't need the income, establish those savings accounts, those emergency funds, but also establish you know, a longer term account. So you can kind of think of it like in buckets. There's really 3 buckets you should be thinking about. One is your short-term needs, which would cover your emergencies, you know, loss of a job, all the things that Laurie outlined. Then there's your medium-term bucket, which is for things maybe a little bit further down the road. I'm going to need a car in 5 years. I know we're going to need to put on a new roof in, you know, 3 years. That's your medium-term bucket. And then your long-term bucket is, you know, your retirement planning, money that's going to be 10, 15, 20 years out, depending on, you know, what age you are. And you really need to fill that first bucket first, you know, that immediate bucket first, before you can start filling the immediate first, then you can start filling the medium and the long-term buckets from there. But, you know, I know Megan had some scenarios. I don't know if you want to start discussing those or.
Yeah,
Sure,
I mean,
one-
I think it's, yeah, go ahead, Megan, as it relates specifically to where you and Joe sit each day.
Yeah, I was just thinking that while both of you were talking, Greg, and especially just now, is that how all of these habits affect each other, right? Like, and believe me, I'm listening. I'm a client of this seminar as much as I am a presenter. But in our business, one of the things I see is clients that are kind of have prepared and are in better shape. We can do, but I am the workers' comp. I do better for them because they're not so desperate, right? So they're like, do whatever we need to do in it. And if it takes a while, I can hold out and not, you know, just take what I can for them so that we can pay their immediate needs. So it's just interesting listening to it, right? That the more of them that are financially set a little bit, or have that emergency fund, or however they're doing it. I often don't know how they're doing it, but I can definitely tell, you know, they will say to me, I'm fine. Like, I'm okay. Do what you got to do. And then, you know, 8 months from now, I might be able to do 3 times what I can do if you want me to fire sale it today, you know. Just one minor aspect. All right, let me just screen share. And how do I, let's see. So where's this? So I'm going to skip much of, you know, I gave some basics on comp that medical and loss, which I already talked about that. But so example, right? So I gave one, I'll start with a living client, injured workers classified 75% disabled and awarded $800 a week. So that would be 75%. First, well, whatever, let's just take it, $800 a week for a maximum of another 400 weeks. That's 7.5 years, 7.69 years.
You haven't shared.
Oh, I haven't.
No,
Just hit that little green share button at the bottom of the screen, Megan.
So sorry. Wait a minute.
Let me make sure that you can.
Where did it go? All right, sorry, hold on.
there we are.
There
Have
we
I
go. And then
shared
hit
now?
from beginning. You got it. Yep.
There we go. So sorry. All right. So this example I gave was you have an injured worker classified 75%. That means very disabled in comp. So most of these people definitely wouldn't be able to go back to the work they were doing. They're awarded $800 per week for a maximum of 400 weeks, 7.69 years. Worker paid the 400 weeks if and only if they're out of work due to the injury, right? So if this person is going to try to get back to work, that can play into a decision somewhere, right? That can play into a decision as to whether I keep the weekly benefits coming or I try to settle it. And my A, B, and C's are off. Sorry, I did this quickly. 400 weeks is 7.5 years, right? So, so this is what I'll talk to my client about. Look at, yes, it's true that if you stay out of work for 7.5 years and they pay this, at the end, they will have paid you $320,000, but they're not paying that up front, right? So carrier offers $200,000 to settle the matter. Attorney fee would be 15%. So 30,000 comes out and the client nets 170. So Greg, you can speak to this more, but we always have to talk to them about, because trying to think from the carrier's point of view as to how much they would give us, right? I said 200, a carrier would start a lot lower than that if we're trying to negotiate this. So I explained to them the basic concept of what the present value of that obligation is, what it really costs them to actually have to pay that. And then so the carrier in this example offers 200,000, maybe they even offer an annuity, and then we have to analyze whether that's a good move or not. And if so, what are they going to do with the money? And one other thing, if the client dies, that keeping the weekly payments, those stop and the family gets nothing. So sometimes that plays into when they're trying to think about how their family's going to survive and what kind of money they have.
So, you know, in looking at this, the question becomes, number one is, have they gotten in arrears, and will they need some of that $170,000 to, bring themselves current, which could reduce the overall value of that. And again, do they need the money? It sounds like in this case, they probably would need the money. I would be interested to see what the carrier, one of the things that you can and probably do is you say, okay, the carrier is offering an annuity which would pay out over a specified period of time. We can also look privately to see if we could take that money and do the same type of thing. It doesn't seem to me like in this case, if they need that income, that there's much of an opportunity to do much long-term planning. But again, it's all individual. Everyone's different. We're just talking about a scenario here. I ran these numbers based on what you gave me, Megan, and if they turn this into income for life, it's going to pay them roughly $778 a month, which is far short of what the $800 a week would be. If they
right, and yet it would last, right? So are you what would you?
It would go for their whole lifetime.
Yeah, and what would that be, Greg? Would that, I just assume that's like an annuity, or are there? I don't know much of that. Yeah. But yeah, something like that is very relevant to them, because even though it's less money, one of the big questions always is, all right, that sounds great, but what do I do when it's gone? Either the payment or the chunk.
Well,
right?
and the question is, can they really go back to work? What can they actually achieve? What is their real capacity in terms of generating income? Do they have Social Security, disability to go along with this, which is always a factor, or can they go back to work? These are all issues that come up, whether the settlement's PI or workers' comp. The calculations are a little different, but the numbers can always be the same.
And
sometimes too, if you've got a motivated client who thinks maybe they could start something on their own, or maybe they sometimes mechanics, right? They'll have very good skills, but the demands of the actual job are really high. They have to be able to physically do an awful lot, but they might have the ability, if they could get some equipment of their own, to make some money on that money, but right. So there's no perfect answer. I understand that.
And if they had prospects of going back to work, then you could look at saying, okay, well, let's set aside, how long is it going to take you to get back to work, reasonably.
Yeah.
And, let's set aside the money that you're going to need to get you through that period of time, and then invest the rest of the money longer term.
Right.
So, there's, like you said, there's no perfect answer in all these scenarios. We can play with the scenario and throw in different variables, but another option would be to say, quite frankly, you could put that $170,000 into a savings account, and take $800 a week, and that's going to last you for 212 weeks. So what is that? Little, just 53% more than 53% of the 400 weeks. And then another thing is to say, well, what if I don't need it? And what if I think I can go back to work? I don't need an annuity. I don't need those payments to last for the rest of my life. What if we just took those payments and over the 7.5 years, let's say, that they would get paid out anyways? Because according to this, that those 400 weeks aren't guaranteed. That's only if you're out because of that. So you could guarantee that period of time, and that's going to change. That's going to change the payment to $2,300 a month, which is almost about roughly 75% of the 3,200.
I have a question for you, Greg, because I don't know that much about annuities. When a carrier offers an annuity, they are saving, right? That they're projecting the number and saying, hey, I'm giving your client this chunk, and they add up all the numbers. Okay.
Right.
But obviously they want to offer that, because instead of handing them 170, they hand them, they're actually paying maybe 100 up front, and it costs them 50 to get the 70, whatever.
That's correct.
And the annuity and the client, obviously, if are there annuities? I guess my question is, are all of the annuities, if you die, there's no more, and that you have no control over them? Can you buy them out or later change your mind? Or most of them, no, the money's, you've given the money away, we're gonna pay you this income and that's it.
Yeah, you can buy them out, but those usually aren't good deals.
Right.
You usually don't come out well when you do that. You can add provisions to these where if the client dies, that there would be money left over.
Yeah, so see, the carrier's annuities always in our business are, you know, obviously maybe, but I'll say it anyway. The living injured worker gets the annuity. If he dies, that's it. The family gets nothing. They keep the balance.
Well,
And they have no control. They can't call it.
That would be a reason to bet a private annuity with a guaranteed payout period. I mean, it's that
Right.
it's guaranteed. I mean, that is, the carrier makes money both ways. They make money on writing the annuity with themselves, first of all, and then they make the annuity make money by, whatever they're paying out. It's not what they actually would have to pay out theoretically.
Right.
Yeah. Just as an aside, is that it doesn't happen in comp that often, the future medicals, but in a PI case, the future medicals are a huge problem and a huge cost issue where you almost have to have an annuity or some kind of set aside basis for the future medical cost. And the reason is that governments and even private insurance companies are now getting much more particular about not paying for medical care that's already been reimbursed by another entity. So, Medicare already has specific rules in place for workers' comp and even for PI. Medicaid is talking about implementing a similar one. And theoretically, a health insurance company could deny payments if they ever found out about it, but they can't. They don't, at this point, they don't know. But if
I'm
you
always
already,
waiting for them to know though, right?
Yeah.
Like just like Medicare figured out a way to figure it out. I'm
Yeah.
surprised private haven't yet. And the minute they do, it's going to change things for sure.
Yeah, because you don't get paid twice. And their argument is going to be upheld by a court. You already got $100,000 for your future care for your foot, for instance. You spend that, and your health insurance company eventually finds out, well, I'm not going to pay ever for your foot again. You may not be in a very good situation.
Let
So,
me can I throw one more thing in here? Is if this person had been living on a budget, had set up the emergency funds, and everything was in, fine, they were in fine shape financially, that changes this equation drastically. And something that you spoke to, Megan, it might give you the opportunity to work this case a little bit longer if there's no immediate need too. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that changes it.
So you've got a second scenario as well, yes, Megan?
Yeah, it's similar. Where is it? It's similar. It's just okay. If we have several of these cases now, some of which are COVID related, but anyway, where a person dies at work. And the benefit there is if a person in New York State dies at work and it's caused by their work, and they have a surviving spouse and no dependent children or disabled children, the surviving spouse is paid their total rate of the decedent's total rate of comp. So if they made, so if that total rate is $600 a week, which is 2/3 of what they were earning, this is one of the few kind of remaining lifetime benefits. The widow or widower would be paid this money, $600 a week for the rest of their life, whether or not they're working, and it's non-taxable. So that yet sometimes it's hard to be sure that you're actually going to win this and prove that the injury. I have one right now that's very on the fence as to whether we can prove that the cause of the death was incident to the employment, right? As opposed to if I just come into my office and drop dead of something, I have an aneurysm. Just because I'm at work doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be covered. But if we can win it, the widow gets this total rate for the rest of her life. And then the carrier wants to offer money up front to not have to pay that. One of the reasons they do that is in certain cases, they have to make a deposit into the aggregate trust fund within like 8 months after the case is decided. So that's the comp board's way of determining the present value of that obligation. So sometimes the carrier is trying to get ahead of that and take advantage of the fact that we don't know for sure if we're going to win this and make an offer of something less. So I just gave this scenario, I'm talking to a widow saying, if we win, you're going to get $600 a week forever. If I knew that was the case, I would definitely say to take that, right? Because I could also settle that later if I know it for sure. But we don't know if we're going to win, and they're offering $250,000 today, and she's 60 years old. So I think I did it the other way around, that this is a husband with the wife dying.
Right, yeah, but and again, it all depends on this person's current situation. If she's working, then the settlement, either one is attractive, but the settlement can then be used for, future planning. She's 5 to 10 years away from retirement. You can set that money aside and let it grow. If she's not working and has been, relying on her husband's income, well, that becomes, more of I don't want to call it a dire situation, but more of an immediate situation where, something like an annuity becomes, comes into play again. Annuity is not my favorite long-term planning investment tool. It's because it's really just solving for a current need. But in this case, you could, that 250, for example, could generate, somewhere in the range of $1,200 a month, which wouldn't be all taxable. I mean, about $400 of that a month is taxable. The rest is considered return of principal. But, so there are things that can be done, but again, it depends on the situation. If this couple had been, budgeting and planning, as we discussed earlier, this can work out, financially. There's always, I'm uncomfortable saying that because, I have clients right now, and I'm always assuring the wife that if something happens to her husband, that she's going to be okay. And she always reminds me, she goes, I can't cuddle with my money, so, I mean, there is an emotional, component to this too, which, we have to be very sensitive to, I think.
Yeah.
So Laurie, you could you speak to also, because there was a scenario, I think you and Greg, I think it was you, Laurie, that mentioned this before. You had a situation where there was a settlement, or there was an inheritance of some kind or something like that, and you had an underage consumer, a customer come in that had to be an FDIC insured bank, et cetera, et cetera. There were some. Could you explain that scenario a little bit?
Well, I think Megan presented this as one of her cases, if I'm correct, but but I'm familiar with those types of things. Being in the banking industry for 35 years, we've seen cases where we're presented with a court order where we have to set up an account. It's a trust, and we have to abide by what the trust spells out to do. Most of the language is that there's a guardian that's appointed with the trust, and the money has to be in an FDIC insured account, and it's the court that says how the money is distributed. And am I correct, Megan?
Did I give you one of those? Yeah, I actually have a kind of a situation now, but right there. Right.
Oh, it might have been Stephanie also, another attorney.
Oh, that might have been Stephanie, yeah.
On the team at Stanley Law. She said, here we go. I've got her notes here. When we have an infant or someone under the age of 18, the proceeds need to be placed in trust for the child, and the parent cannot have access to withdraw the funds from the account. Stephanie also had a 17-year-old whose mother died in a motorcycle accident, tragically. He was going to receive $500,000 6 months before he turned 18. He wanted to buy the house that he and his mother lived in, and he wanted to attend college. So at that time, the firm worked with a financial planner to give him enough upfront cash, this is what we're talking about, to pay off the mortgage, buy the house, and then the financial invested in an annuity to provide him with a monthly income, and the rest was left in an investment account. So that got split up 3 ways. So there was an immediate need pay off so that he could live in the home, etc. Then there was the week to week need of, I need an income to live on. And then ultimately take some of that and put, and obviously when you're dealing with a $500,000 award, that's much more feasible to do. But I suppose even at a smaller level, I guess you could still implement that. Stephanie also referred to one more, and I'll just share this because this is an interesting story. Joe, do you remember this case where it was recent? Stephanie said, settled a case with an infant or with a child who's currently only 10 years old with a traumatic brain injury. Upfront money was put into a supplemental needs trust to ensure that the child's Social Security income benefits and Medicaid were not impacted. These funds in this trust can then be dispersed to the child for items that would not be otherwise covered by federal, state, or county programs like health insurance, etc., and can be used for summer camp for kids with traumatic brain injuries, special computers, other things that the child's going to need. Another portion of the child settlement was used to purchase an annuity, which will provide him with monthly payments for living expenses after he turns 18. Do you remember that? I mean, it sounds like it was a recent case based on what Stephanie said, Joe.
I know this case, yes.
Yeah. So to Greg and Megan's point both is that there are all of these variables that that differ. There are patterns, but they're unique to each case. At the same time, one thing I think we can all agree that's universal is that if you plan ahead of time as best as you possibly can, number one, not to say what it's going to enable you for your mental well-being if you encounter a financial emergency, but also just the practicality of being prepared and having your bases covered and not feeling like you're in a position of desperation, which is never a good place to be. Any final notes for Manu? Actually, we're perfectly on time. We're just at 11:58, so that's great. But any other thoughts or closing thoughts from anyone here on the panel today?
I'd just like to thank Megan and Joe and Angela for inviting me to be here. These are very interesting but real scenarios that are faced by people every day. And I think it's important that we keep the emotional and the financial well-being of these clients in the forefront of our mind when we're helping them. When we're working with a minor, it's a real opportunity to help educate them. I mean, because they're faced with it, right? I mean, if you're talking to kids in school, which Seneca Savings does all the time, and you're talking about hypothetical situations, it's very different than presenting a kid with, here, this is what's going to happen right now. And you can prepare them, start training them up and educating them for what they're going to face and the decisions that they're going to need to make going forward. And that's where us as advisors become critical in the process to help these people as they move forward and heal and hopefully get financially stable as well.
Joe, any final thoughts for today? Any final words of advice?
Well, this just puts into, again, perspective is that information is a critical thing to understand and to know. And so you can appreciate where things are and where they're going to go. And if you're not sure, ask. And it's kind of scary that schools don't have a core curriculum about financial planning or finances in general, but that doesn't bode well. And I'm glad somebody is at least assisting with that, because part of the problem is where people end up where they are is that they've never been educated or advised or guided. And again, if you're not sure where to go, you're never going to get there.
Yeah, I think that's great that you're working toward that.
Laurie, if parents, if kids, if families, anyone seeing this, if they want to find out more about some of those tools or use some of them themselves, budgeting and how to set up the financial emergency fund, et cetera, where would you like them to go?
They can visit us online. They could come to any of our branch locations. But also, if you're a parent and you have a student in school, I would ask if there is any type of financial information in the classroom, because chances are we might be able to furnish that to the school. So we're trying to get into the schools. Sometimes it's not as easy as knocking on the door of the administrator and asking to be invited in. So we offer that for free for the schools. So
Yeah, it takes some compliance and work with the teacher because it is woven right into their curriculum. But I've seen the process before, Laurie, and it's pretty straightforward. And EverFi does this nationwide. And you're in Seneca Savings locally, regionally. You're working with how many schools? 5 or 6 schools now? 7 schools? I'm trying to
well,
recall.
we're in 4 different school districts, and within those school districts, we're in elementary schools, high schools. And depending on the school, it really helps, that weighs on the curriculum that we're providing. In the high schools, we offer an entrepreneurial program to teach kids on how to establish their own business. It's really kind of cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Greg, where can people find you?
You can email me at greg.boshart@lpl.com. And my number is 315-753-4034. And I would love to talk to people, even if they just have, questions that they need answered. We're happy to help people.
Wonderful. All right. And of course, you can always find Stanley Law at stanleylawoffices.com. Please like, share, and comment on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. This webinar will be posted on YouTube as well as Stanley Law, the Stanley Law blog and website. So thank you, Megan, Joe, Greg, Laurie, and you all be out there, be well. And wherever you're at in your financial journey, it's never too late to begin. So consider beginning today to be prepared for the unexpected. Take care all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.